My name is Mark. I'm 39, living in Austin, Texas. A city that never really sleeps, only hums at different volumes. These days, my life is quiet, measured. But a few years ago, I was a heartbeat away from losing everything. My home, my savings, my belief in love itself. Started the way these stories always do, with charm. Her name was Rachel. She worked as an interior designer, though she could have been anything that required a room to look at her. She had that kind of presence. Magnetic without effort, her confidence sharp enough to draw blood if you stood too close. Her laughter carried. Her perfume lingered. People remembered her. We met at a gallery opening downtown, one of those places where the wine is cheap but poured into expensive glasses, and the art looks like someone's confession disguised as color. She was standing in front of a photograph of a lake, blue and endless, and said it reminded her of escape. When she turned to me, she smiled like she already knew the next few months of my life would belong to her. Our romance grew fast, hungry for movement. Within weeks we were inseparable. Dinners that bled into midnight walks, weekend road trips across the sprawl of Texas, shared playlists and whispered plans. I took her to Marfa, to the desert where the world feels stripped down to bone and light. She told me she'd never felt safer than when she was with me. I believed her. It wasn't long before talk of the future arrived, uninvited but inevitable. She said she wanted a house by the water, somewhere near Lake Travis. "You'd design the garden," she said, "and I'd make the inside beautiful." She spoke about our life like it was already happening, a tone I mistook for certainty rather than entitlement. After a year, I proposed. I still remember the look in her eyes when I opened the box. Surprise first, then calculation, then that perfect practice joy. The ring had belonged to my grandmother. A thin band of gold, modest but steeped in memory. She cried, and for a moment, I thought it was real. But love can shift so quietly you don't notice until the ground's already gone. It began with questions. Small at first. "How much do you make again? You must have good savings if you bought this house outright." She asked about investments, about the value of the property, about whether I'd ever thought of upgrading. When I told her I preferred to live without debt, she laughed softly, brushing her hand across my arm. "You're too cautious, Mark. Money's supposed to move like energy. You don't let it sit still." Soon she was talking about status, about visibility. A new car, something worthy of your position. A vacation to the Amalfi Coast to celebrate us properly. A downtown apartment we could use for entertaining. At first, I thought it was enthusiasm, that she was dreaming out loud. But every dream had a price tag attached, and every conversation tilted toward acquisition. She began comparing me to her friends' partners. "Do you know what David did for Laura's birthday? He bought her a spa weekend in Napa. He just gets her." Or, "You're such a solid guy, but you could learn to spoil a woman now and then." I tried to laugh it off. I told myself she was ambitious, that maybe I was too practical, too restrained. I grew up in a house where love was measured in what you built, not what you bought. My father used to say, "Luxury's what people chase when they don't know how to build peace." I used to agree, but Rachel didn't want peace. She wanted proof. And the more I gave, the dinners, the small gifts, the trips, the more the gratitude faded. It was as though my efforts became invisible the moment they were spent. Once, after I'd surprised her with a weekend in New Orleans, she smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're learning." I remember the way she said it, not with affection but approval, like a teacher grading effort. There were moments, quiet ones, when I caught glimpses of who she was beneath the gloss. A quick flicker of impatience when things didn't go her way. The way she'd compliment people only to undercut them seconds later. The way her eyes lit up when someone mentioned money. Still, I ignored it. I wanted to believe in the version of her I fell for, the woman who danced barefoot in motel rooms, who hummed songs under her breath when she thought no one was listening. The woman who, at least once, made me feel chosen. But beneath that illusion, something colder was waiting. The first time I felt it, we were having dinner with her friends, two couples, all of them dressed like success had a uniform. Midway through the evening, one of them asked if we planned to buy property together. Rachel answered before I could. "We've been talking about upgrading soon," she said, her tone light but pointed. "Mark's done so well for himself. It's time to enjoy it." Everyone laughed. I did too, but it caught in my throat. That night, when I asked what she meant, she brushed it off. "It was a joke," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're too sensitive." That became her refrain whenever I pushed back. "You're too sensitive. You're reading too much into it. You should trust me." And I did, for a while. But trust isn't blind. It's just what you cling to when you're afraid to see. She started spending more time with her friends, the kind who talked about relationships like investments. They'd sip cocktails and trade stories about gifts, trips, and returns. I overheard one of them once say, "If he really loves you, he'll prove it." Rachel didn't argue. She just smiled. Then one afternoon, I caught her in my study, flipping through my financial documents. She said she was just looking for a stamp. I wanted to believe her, but her eyes darted too quickly, her voice too smooth. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow shadows across the wall, and thought about every time she'd asked about my house deed, my accounts, my will. Questions I'd mistaken for curiosity now sounded like reconnaissance. I told myself I was being paranoid, that love means transparency, that she had a right to know. But deep down, unease was spreading. Not loud, not visible, just steady, like rot beneath paint. One evening, over wine, she asked if I'd ever had a prenup before. The question came out too casual to be casual. "No," I said. "Didn't see the need." She smiled, leaned back and said, "That's so romantic." Then, after a pause that stretched too long, she added, "But you'd be fine signing one, right? If I asked." I studied her then, the perfect ease of her expression, the practiced softness in her tone. And I realized she wasn't asking for equality. She was testing leverage. That's when the first crack appeared between who she was and who I thought she might be. I didn't answer right away. I just said, "Let's talk about it later." But the thought stayed with me, sharp, unfinished, whispering at the edges of every conversation. Over the next few weeks, I noticed how she began referring to my house as our house. My accounts became our resources. Even my grandmother's ring, the one she never stopped showing to friends, became our heirloom. Possession disguised as partnership. The shift was subtle but total, a quiet colonization of language that revealed everything I needed to know. Still, I stayed. I told myself love demands patience, that maybe I was jaded from my parents' divorce, that suspicion was just fear wearing reason's mask. But each time she smiled at me, I felt the same question return. Did she love me, or the life I'd built? It's strange how clarity comes, not in lightning, but in the small, constant rain of moments you try not to count. That summer, we drove out to the lake house she'd been dreaming of. She stood on the dock at sunset, eyes fixed on the water, and said softly, "We could make this our forever place. I can see it." Her hand was on mine, warm, certain, and yet all I could think was, who's the we she's seeing? Because for the first time since I met her, I wasn't sure I was in that picture at all. I grew up watching a marriage fall apart like an old house in a storm. My parents fought over everything, the mortgage, the car, the savings, the silence. When the divorce came, it wasn't the shouting that ruined them. It was the paperwork. My father lost everything he'd worked for because he thought love would protect him. Didn't. Paper did, and he never had any. That memory lived in me like a scar I didn't talk about. So when Rachel and I got engaged, I told myself I wouldn't repeat his mistake. Love is emotional, yes, but marriage is arithmetic. One evening after dinner, I brought it up. She was sitting on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, a glass of red wine balanced perfectly between two fingers. I told her we should discuss a prenuptial agreement. Her smile froze, not a full reaction, just a flicker like a photograph catching on fire at the corner. "A prenup?" she said, as if testing the sound of the word. "Just a precaution," I said. "Something clear. Whatever we bring into the marriage stays ours. Whatever we build together, we split equally." She stared at me for a long time, as though I'd insulted her faith in us. Then she laughed lightly, a laugh rehearsed to sound forgiving. You really think I'm that kind of woman? I think I've seen what happens when people stop being careful, I said. The air between us shifted. She didn't fight. She didn't storm out. She just set her glass down, leaned closer and said, "If it makes you feel safe, then let's do it. I don't need your money, Mark. I just need you." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. The next week, I called my lawyer, Mr. Collins. He was an older man, practical, blunt, allergic to sentiment. I trusted him because he never told me what I wanted to hear. I explained what I needed. A clear, simple prenup. My house, my savings, my investments protected. Everything earned after the wedding shared. Collins approved, said it was fair, even generous. Rachel came to his office the following Friday. She wore a cream blazer, gold earrings that caught every bit of light, and that smile that could disarm a room. Collins laid out the papers, explained each clause. She nodded politely, asked no questions, and signed the preliminary draft. I remember thinking how composed she looked, how convincing. When she slipped her signature onto the final page, she said, "There, done. Now can we please stop talking about money and start planning a life?" I thought the matter was settled. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. A month passed. The wedding plans grew louder, guest lists, flower arrangements, venues. I let Rachel take the lead. She loved control disguised as taste. I handled the practicalities. Deposits, vendors, insurance. Everything was smooth, or so I thought. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Collins. His voice was calm, but beneath it, something was off. "Mark," he said, "I just received the revised draft. Are you sure you approved these changes?" "What changes?" "The property clauses. The ownership definitions. They're different." My stomach tightened. "Different how?" He paused. "Your house is now listed as marital property. Your investment accounts too. There's also a new clause, a maintenance provision. It states that in the event of divorce, your spouse retains a lifestyle equivalent to that during marriage, paid by you." I sat in silence, hearing my pulse louder than his words. "That's not what we agreed," I said finally. "I know, which is why I called. The email authorizing the changes came from your address." I froze. "That's impossible." "Then someone used your name." That was the moment I realized I wasn't paranoid. I was late. I told Collins to hold everything, to send me copies of both documents. When I read them side by side that night, my hands shook. The forgery was perfect, my digital signature replicated, the tone of the approval email eerily similar to how I actually wrote. She'd studied me. She'd learned my patterns, my words, even my punctuation. The next morning, I watched her move through the kitchen, calm, radiant, humming along to music as she poured coffee. I wondered if she knew I knew, if she felt any guilt at all. Couldn't tell. She looked like innocence itself. That was her gift, to commit betrayal with elegance. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next few days planning. With Collins's help, I created two versions of the contract, one genuine, one altered. Identical in layout, identical in weight, but vastly different in truth. The real agreement protected me. The false one contained her fraudulent revisions. 2 weeks later, I told Rachel the final signing was ready. She arrived at Collins's office in a white suit, her hair perfectly set, her eyes bright with victory disguised as love. Collins handed her the false draft, the one I knew she'd expect. She skimmed the pages quickly, barely pretending to read. Then she smiled at me, squeezed my hand, and signed. I signed too, the real document, the one that safeguarded everything. Collins, without a word, sealed both into separate folders, his expression unreadable. The theater was complete. That night, Rachel was euphoric. She called her mother, told her everything was official, that we were one step away from forever. She poured champagne, danced barefoot in the living room, kissed me with the sweetness of triumph. I watched her and wondered how many men before me had fallen for that same act. For 2 weeks, I pretended everything was normal. We talked about wedding menus, honeymoon destinations, seating charts. She was glowing, confident, oblivious. Meanwhile, Collins and I gathered the evidence, the forged email, the falsified draft, the metadata linking it to her device. It was all there, undeniable. When the time came, I arranged one final meeting at Collins's office. I told Rachel we needed to sign the last financial appendix, something routine. She didn't hesitate. She even joked, "You and your papers. Always so serious." She was radiant that morning. White dress again. It looked almost like a rehearsal for the wedding that would never happen. Collins greeted her politely, laid out the documents, and then, with a steady voice, said, "Before we begin, I think there's something you should see." He placed both versions of the contract on the table, hers and mine. Then, one by one, he read aloud the discrepancies, the forged authorization, the timestamps. Rachel went pale. The kind of pale that strips even the most beautiful people of their mask. She tried to laugh it off at first, said it must be a misunderstanding. Said maybe there'd been a mix-up, a draft confusion. Collins remained silent. When he presented the email she'd sent under my name, the room changed. The air turned heavy. The silence between us felt like an autopsy. Finally, I asked, "Why, Rachel?" Her eyes glistened, but not with remorse. "I just wanted to feel secure," she whispered. "You have so much, and I have nothing to fall back on. It's not about money, it's about safety." I nodded slowly. "Would you still have said yes if I had nothing?" She hesitated. The pause was the answer. That's how I knew. Everything else had been performance. Every smile, every word, every promise. She loved the version of me that could fund her comfort, not the man who built it. The engagement ended that day. No screaming, no spectacle, just a quiet unraveling of illusion. As I walked out of Collins's office, I didn't feel anger, just a strange, exhausted clarity. I'd almost handed my life to someone who saw it as inheritance. I'd been a transaction disguised as devotion. Outside, the city buzzed, cars, voices, life moving on. I stood on the sidewalk, sunlight cutting across my face, and thought about my father losing everything because he couldn't imagine that love could lie in ink. Now I knew better. After the confrontation, silence followed me home. Not peace, just that hollow quiet that lingers after a storm. Rachel had moved her things out within a day. She left a note on the counter, nothing more than a sentence. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't want to be hurt either." It was almost poetic in its dishonesty. The next few days felt like waking from anesthesia, the world familiar but dulled. People at work congratulated me on the upcoming wedding. I nodded and said nothing. The invitations were still stacked in a drawer, names neatly printed, future tense already obsolete. Collins told me to keep calm, to let the process end quietly. "She'll move on," he said. "They always do when the money doesn't." But something in me refused to let it end without truth. Forgiveness I could manage. Forgetting I couldn't. I wanted her to see what she tried to do, not for revenge but for understanding, the kind that burns its lesson into the bone. So I set a plan in motion. Not cruelty, clarity. I knew Rachel still thought she'd won. In her mind, the forged contract was binding. She believed she had me pinned. My house, my savings, my years. I could see it in the tone of her messages. Polite, cheerful, performative. She was waiting for the wedding, waiting to finalize her victory under vows. So I let her believe it. I replied gently, met her for coffee, even smiled. I played the part she expected, the steady man she thought she'd fooled. Meanwhile, Collins and I prepared 2 sets of final documents. One genuine, one counterfeit. Hers would mirror the fake clauses she'd written. Mine, the real agreement we had filed legally weeks before. The signing was scheduled for the first week of May. She arrived early, radiant as ever. White suit again, gold bracelet glinting in the morning light. Her perfume filled the office before she even spoke. "Ready for our big day?" she teased. I nodded. "Always." Collins greeted us, polite as ceremony. He laid the papers out carefully, separating them with deliberate precision. Rachel didn't notice. She never looked past the surface of anything. She signed quickly, confident, hand steady. When it was my turn, I picked up my pen and signed the authentic version, the one that would stand in court. 2 signatures, 2 realities. One true, one false. The performance complete. When we left the office, she slipped her arm through mine. "You see?" she said. "No reason to worry. Everything's official now." I smiled because she was right, just not in the way she thought. For the next 2 weeks, we lived in an uneasy imitation of happiness. She talked about the wedding nonstop, the floral arrangements, the guest list, the champagne tasting. I listened, said little. At night, I lay beside her, counting the days until the truth came due. She slept soundly, dreaming of ownership. Then came the morning I'd been waiting for. I invited her back to Collins's office, told her we needed to sign a final insurance addendum for the honeymoon. She didn't hesitate. "You're thorough," she said, brushing her hair back. "That's what I love about you." When we entered the conference room, Collins was already there, his expression unreadable. Rachel took her seat, crossed her legs, and smiled. "Let's make this quick," she said. "I have a dress fitting in an hour." Collins adjusted his glasses. "This won't take long," he said. "I just need to confirm a few details and clarify some inconsistencies." Her smile flickered. Inconsistencies. He opened the folder, the one containing the evidence. The forged email, the metadata, the timestamps, her unauthorized edits. He laid them out like cards in a losing hand. "We discovered a set of altered documents submitted under Mr. Davis's authorization," he said evenly. "They appear to have originated from your email account." The color drained from her face. "That's not possible," she said quickly. "It must be some mistake. Maybe a mix-up." Collins shook his head. "No mistake. We verified the source. It's fraud, Ms. Turner." She looked at me then, eyes wide, desperate. "Mark, please." I raised a hand. "Just answer one question," I said quietly. "Would you have still married me if I'd had nothing?" Her lips parted, but no words came. In that silence, I found the truth I'd been searching for. Not confession. Confirmation. Collins closed the folder. "Given the evidence, the engagement contract is void. You are not entitled to any of Mr. Davis's assets." Rachel blinked hard, trying to summon composure. "I wasn't trying to steal," she whispered. "I was just scared. You have so much and I wanted security. That's not a crime." "It's fraud," Collins replied, calm but firm. "And it could have been prosecuted." I stood. "But it won't be," I said. "Consider this mercy." Her eyes filled, but not with gratitude, with humiliation. She gathered her purse, stood shakily, and said, "You'll regret this. No one treats me like a thief." I watched her walk out, heels clicking like a metronome counting down the end of something false. When the door shut, the sound felt final. Collins exhaled. "You handled that better than most," he said. "Maybe," I answered, "but it doesn't feel like winning. Because that's the thing about betrayal. Even when you see it coming, it still leaves a stain." I went home, poured myself a drink, and sat at the table where we'd once planned our future. The room smelled of lavender candles she'd left behind. I stared at the empty space where her laughter used to live and wondered how long it would take for my house to stop echoing her name. The next morning, the phone calls began. First from Rachel, then her mother, then mutual friends. Some accused me of cruelty, of paranoia. Others said they'd never trusted her. Sympathy and blame came mixed, indistinguishable. I answered no one. Truth doesn't need witnesses. Weeks passed. Rachel tried to reach me through letters. Long, dramatic pages filled with apologies and half-truths. She said she'd made a mistake, that fear drove her, that love had been real once. I didn't respond. Love built on deceit is like a bridge built on rot. It collapses the moment you try to cross it. Then, months later, word reached me through a mutual acquaintance. She was living with someone new, a real estate agent from Houston. Handsome, loud, charming, the kind of man who spends money he doesn't yet have. She'd found her reflection again, just in a different mirror. I wasn't surprised. Some people don't learn, They migrate. One evening, I drove past the lake house we'd once dreamed of buying. The sunset bled across the water, gold and red, and I thought of the life that almost was. The lie that almost became law. I parked for a while, listening to the sound of cicadas rising like static, and wondered what lesson I was supposed to take from it all. Maybe that love without honesty is just a contract waiting to expire. Maybe that safety built on deceit always costs more than danger faced in truth. Either way, I knew one thing. I would never sign another promise without reading the fine print of the soul offering it. The trap had closed, the exposure complete, and for once the cost wasn't mine to pay. The weeks after Rachel's exposure passed like fog, shapeless, slow, without mercy. There's a special kind of silence that follows betrayal, a silence that doesn't comfort but clarifies. It strips you bare. You begin to hear the sound of your own habits. The spoon in the empty cup, the door creak that once meant she was home. Each noise becomes proof that absence can still make noise. Her name kept appearing in small ways. A mail addressed to her, a receipt tucked in a drawer, a faint perfume trapped in the curtains. It took months to exorcise her from the house, and longer from my mind. For a while, I'd catch myself imagining her return. She'd knock on the door, eyes soft, voice trembling with apology. But even in my imagination, I could see the lie hiding behind her smile. I'd open the door and let the fantasy dissolve. Rachel's mother called twice, her voice taut with practiced outrage. "You humiliated her," she said. "You ruined her reputation." I said nothing. Some truths don't need defending. I hung up and didn't answer when she called again. There's a saying I used to believe that time heals. But time doesn't heal. It reveals. It shows you who you were, what you allowed, and what you'll never permit again. I started running in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. The body learns faster than the heart how to move forward. Each mile burned off a layer of resentment. Each sunrise looked a little less like punishment. By winter, the house felt different. Lighter, emptier, honest. I stopped avoiding the mirror. I sold the engagement ring, the last relic of an illusion, and donated the money to a shelter. I told Collins to close the file. "All done?" he asked. "All done," I said, though some part of me knew that nothing about betrayal ever ends cleanly. Months slipped into a rhythm. Work, coffee, sleep, quiet. Then, unexpectedly, someone new entered the picture. Her name was Emily. She was nothing like Rachel, no theatrics, no glittering ambition. She taught biology at a public high school, spent weekends grading papers, and tending to a small garden she called my sanctuary. We met at a bookstore, the old kind, the kind that still smells like dust and patience. I noticed her reading a book on ecosystems. She noticed me watching. Somehow that was enough to begin. We talked for hours over coffee. Her stories weren't grand. They were grounded, about students, about her aging cat, about her parents' marriage that somehow lasted 4 decades. When I told her about my work in architecture, she smiled and said, "So you build stability for a living." No one had ever put it that way before. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to perform. I didn't have to impress her with plans or possessions. She liked silence. She liked ordinary things. Rain on windows, unplanned evenings, cheap wine. There was no rush, no strategy. Just calm. But ghosts don't leave quietly. When we grew closer, part of me flinched at every sign of trust. When she spoke about commitment, I heard contracts. When she mentioned the future, I felt the echo of Rachel's laughter, the hum of deceit. I thought I was broken beyond repair, a man who measured affection in clauses. Then one evening, Emily invited me to dinner with her friends. We sat under string lights in her backyard, the air thick with grilled food and low conversation. At one point, someone joked about prenups, the way people do when they don't understand their gravity. Emily turned to me, eyes calm, and said, "If we ever marry, we'll have one. Protects us both. Fair is fair." That moment stopped me. She didn't flinch at the idea. She didn't see it as a threat or mistrust. She saw it as balance. Later that night, as we washed dishes together, she said, You can't rebuild trust if you refuse to put structure under it. I realized then that love, real love, isn't blind. It's transparent. It doesn't demand surrender. It asks for partnership. A year later, we married in a small ceremony by the river. No grand declarations, no borrowed words. Just vows spoken quietly, meant to be kept. When we signed our prenup, she smiled and said, "Now we can focus on everything that isn't paper." 3 years have passed since then. We live in a modest house just outside Austin. There's a small garden out back. Tomatoes, rosemary, a stubborn lemon tree that refuses to bloom but keeps trying anyway. We built a life not from luxury, but from routine. We fix what breaks. We laugh when it rains through the window we keep forgetting to seal. Sometimes I think of Rachel. Not often, but enough to remember. I heard through a friend that she moved again. A new city, a new man, another cycle starting over. I wish her neither good nor bad. Just distance. What she taught me unintentionally is priceless. That affection without respect is manipulation. That charm without integrity is just deceit in better lighting. That a man can lose more than money when he forgets to guard his dignity. Every so often I still visit the lake. The one from that photograph where she first said it reminded her of escape. I sit on the dock, watching the light ripple across the water, and think about how close I came to building a life on a foundation of lies. If love is architecture, then I've learned to test the beams before I start decorating the walls. When the sun sets, the reflection on the surface looks almost like gold, the same color as the ring I once gave away. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just reminds me of how easily something pure can be pawned for comfort. I drive home to Emily, to the smell of dinner and the hum of quiet music from the kitchen. She greets me with flour on her hands, a half smile, and says, "You're late, architect." And in that simple moment, I understand what safety really means. Not protection from loss, but freedom from pretending. Rachel's ghost no longer haunts the house. She lives only in the lesson. Love without honesty is a transaction. Trust without truth is a gamble. I learned both too late, but I learned them completely. So now, when people ask me if I believe in second chances, I tell them this. I believe in building again, but never on the same ground that crumbled. And I believe that the cost of peace is vigilance. Because in the end, every man learns that love, like architecture, must stand on foundations you can inspect, not illusions you simply admire. The past gave me the blueprint, the present the shelter. The rest is up to me. And if that makes me cautious, so be it. I've earned the right to build carefully.